She had nothing left but a few coins, a torn coat, and a place on the cold pavement where people barely looked at her. Then one freezing night, she heard a weak sound behind a stack of broken crates and found a starving mother dog curled around two shivering puppies, trying to keep them alive with almost nothing. The old woman gave them the last piece of bread she had, then the last of her broth, then her nights, then her hands knitting tiny sweaters in the dark so the puppies would stop shaking from the cold. She thought she was saving 3 stray dogs. She had no idea those same puppies were about to turn her whole life around and lead her straight to a home she never thought she'd see again. Before we start, please subscribe. When we hit 100,000 subscribers, I'll be buying a dog I truly admire, a Tibetan Mastiff. Let me know in the comment, do I have bad taste or is that a solid choice? By the time people noticed her, she had usually already been sitting there for hours. She chose the same stretch of pavement most mornings, not because it was good, but because it was predictable. The bakery across the road opened early, and for a few minutes the smell of warm bread drifted across the street strongly enough to make hunger feel almost cruel. Then the buses began. Office workers passed with lowered eyes and quick hands, holding coffee, bags, phones, and lives that seemed to have no spare room in them for anyone sitting on the ground. She did not blame them anymore. Blame required energy, and energy was the one thing she had learned to spend carefully. She begged quietly. That had become a kind of rule with her. She did not pull at sleeves. She did not cry out. She sat with her back against a wall and a small metal cup placed near her feet, wrapped in a coat so old the lining had begun to separate from the fabric. When someone dropped a coin in, she lifted her head and thanked them softly. When no one did, she stayed where she was and watched the day move around her. What made life on the street hard was not one thing. It was not only hunger, and it was not only cold. It was the accumulation of small humiliations that never stopped. The way shopkeepers watched your hands before they watched your face. The way rain found every weakness in your shelter. The way people could stand close enough to smell your clothes and still look through you as if your body were only another shadow on the wall. But the worst part, the part that wore on her most, came after dark, when the city thinned and sound changed and every quiet thought grew louder. Nights made loneliness feel like a living thing. That evening the wind had sharpened by sunset, and by the time the lights in the shop windows began turning off one by one, she already knew it was going to be a hard night. She had made little that day. A few coins. Half a cup of tea someone bought for her around noon. A bruised banana. Not enough for comfort, but enough to last if she stretched it. She tucked the coins into the cloth purse she kept inside her coat and walked slowly toward the back street where she sometimes slept, near an old building whose rear wall blocked the worst of the wind. She was tired enough that at first she almost missed the sound. It came from behind a stack of broken wooden crates pushed against the wall, a low, rough breath followed by a tiny scraping movement. She froze. The city made all kinds of night sounds, rats in rubbish, cats in alleyways, bottles shifting under the feet of people who had nowhere else to go. She waited. The sound came again, thinner now, and something in it made her step carefully toward the crates instead of away from them. She saw the mother dog first. The animal stood half-turned toward her, body curved protectively around two tiny puppies pressed so tightly against her belly they seemed to disappear into her. The dog was thinner than she should have been. Her coat was dull in places, with patches of dirt worked deep into it, and her eyes held the strained focus of something that had been surviving too long without help. She did not growl. She did not lunge. But she watched the woman the way a mother watches any threat. even one too tired to stand fully upright. The puppies were shaking. That was what got her. Not the dog, not even the sight of how thin they all were. It was the trembling. The puppies were too small, too new to the world to understand what cold meant, and their bodies were doing what bodies did when there was not enough warmth to borrow. The woman crouched slowly, one hand on her knee to steady herself. "It's all right," she said, though she knew animals trusted tone more than words. "I'm not taking anything from you." Inside her pocket was the only food she still had, a small heel of bread she had saved without fully admitting to herself why. The hunger in her own stomach sharpened as soon as her fingers touched it. She could have eaten it in 3 bites. Instead, she brought it out, broke it into smaller pieces, and set them on the ground a little distance away from the dog. Then she sat back and waited. The mother dog did not move at first. Her eyes went from the bread to the woman and back again. The puppies kept pressing into her, still trembling, still too cold. Finally, with the caution of something that had every reason not to believe in kindness, the dog stepped forward, picked up a piece of bread, and took it back to the puppies. She ate almost nothing herself. She nudged the crumbs toward them first. The woman felt something shift inside her then, not a grand feeling, not hope exactly, but a kind of stubbornness she had not felt in a long time. She understood that look. She understood giving away what should have been yours because something smaller needed it more. That night she did not sleep properly. She sat near the crates with her coat wrapped tightly around herself, watching the dog and puppies through the dark. Every so often she stood and walked a little to keep blood moving through her legs. Near dawn, she counted the coins she had made the day before and realized there was just enough to buy something warm if she was careful. When morning came, she did not go first to her usual spot on the pavement. She went to a small stall and bought the cheapest bowl of broth she could find. It was thin and salty and came with stale bread on the side. The smell nearly undid her. She carried it back with both hands and set it down near the mother dog, who by then no longer looked at her with fear alone. Hunger had entered the space too. The dog drank first only because the puppies could not. Afterward, the woman soaked bits of bread until they softened and nudged them close enough for the puppies to mouth at them. That became the beginning of everything. She returned to the street later than usual and sat longer than usual because now she was not measuring the day by her own needs. She was measuring it by theirs. Every coin mattered differently. Every leftover piece of food mattered differently. When she was given something soft, she saved it for the mother. When she was given something warm, she carried it carefully through the cold instead of eating it on the way. That evening, when the air dropped again and the puppies began to shiver, she searched through the bottom of her bag and found what she had not touched in years. 2 knitting needles and a few tangled scraps of yarn, leftovers from a life that had collapsed long before the street took her in. Her hands ached, and at first the motion felt clumsy, but memory lived in her fingers more faithfully than she expected. She sat under the weak light spilling from the back of the building and knitted until her shoulders stiffened, stopping only to rub warmth into her hands and begin again. The first little sweater came out crooked, too loose at the neck and too tight around the middle, but it held shape. The second was better. By the time she slid them gently over the puppies' bodies, morning was beginning to color the sky. The mother dog watched the entire time, tense but still. When the sweaters were on, the shaking stopped faster than she expected. The woman looked at the 3 of them, at the mother leaning down to lick one puppy's ear, while the other tucked itself clumsily against her side, and she realized without fully saying it to herself that she had already crossed some invisible line. They were no longer strays she had fed. They were hers to worry about now. And though she still had no home, no proper bed, and no certainty about tomorrow, that morning she rose from the pavement with something she had not carried in a very long time. Cold nights on the street always came with broken sleep, but that night had been different. Every small movement from the puppies had woken her. Every time the mother dog shifted, the woman opened her eyes to check whether something was wrong. The strange part was that the exhaustion did not feel heavy the way it normally did. It felt purposeful, the way people once felt when they woke early because someone depended on them. The puppies had stayed warm through the night inside the small sweaters she had knitted for them. They had been uneven and poorly shaped, but they worked. The puppies had curled into the wool and slept with the kind of careless comfort only very young animals seemed capable of. The mother dog had not slept much. She remained alert most of the night, lifting her head whenever footsteps passed nearby or whenever wind rattled something in the alley. But she no longer looked at the woman as if she were a threat. By morning, the dog's watchfulness had softened into something closer to cautious acceptance. The woman stood slowly, stretching the stiffness out of her back, and looked down at the three of them. The puppies were awake now, wobbling clumsily on legs that still did not fully understand balance. One of them stumbled into the other and fell sideways, then righted itself with a confused shake of its head. For the first time in many years, the woman laughed. It was a quiet laugh, almost embarrassed, but it surprised her all the same. She checked the small cloth purse inside her coat. The coins were not many, but they were enough to buy something small if she spent them carefully. Normally, she would stretch every coin for herself. Now the calculation had changed. She crouched beside the mother dog. "I'll be back," she murmured softly. The dog watched her leave but did not follow. The woman returned to the street where she usually begged, carrying her metal cup the way she always did. But something had changed in the way she sat there now. Instead of simply waiting for the day to pass, she found herself studying every person who walked by, measuring quietly who might drop a coin and who might not. Time mattered differently when three hungry lives were waiting. The morning crowd moved quickly as usual, and for the first hour very little happened. A man in a suit dropped a coin without looking. A woman carrying groceries paused long enough to place two small coins in the cup and offer a brief smile. Another passerby gave her half a sandwich wrapped in paper. She thanked them the same way she always had. But this time she did not eat the sandwich. She wrapped it carefully and tucked it inside her coat. By midday, the coins had slowly added up to enough for a small meal. She walked to the cheapest food stall she knew and bought a bowl of thin soup and a piece of bread. The smell made her stomach tighten with hunger, but she carried it away untouched. When she returned to the alley, the puppies rushed toward her with clumsy excitement, their small sweaters bouncing awkwardly around their bodies. The mother dog stood as well, though she kept a careful distance at first. The woman sat down on the ground and tore the bread into pieces. She soaked them in the soup until they softened, then placed the pieces gently in front of the puppies. They attacked the food eagerly, pushing into each other with small squeaks of excitement. The mother dog watched. When the puppies finished, the woman slid the bowl toward the dog. The dog drank slowly at first, then faster. The woman waited until the bowl was empty. Only then did she scrape the bottom of the cup and sip the small amount of broth left behind. That became the rhythm of their days. Each morning she went to the street and begged the way she always had. Each afternoon she returned with whatever food she could gather. Some days it was bread, some days rice wrapped in newspaper, sometimes it was scraps someone had thrown away. Whatever she brought, the dogs ate first. The puppies began growing quickly. Within a few days they had learned to wobble farther from the crates before tumbling back again. Their sweaters, though crooked and mismatched, kept them warm enough to survive the cold nights. The woman continued knitting whenever she found scraps of yarn or loose threads in rubbish bins. Her hands remembered the work faster each day. Soon the sweaters began to look better. People began to notice. At first it was only a few curious glances when she returned to the street carrying one of the puppies in her arms. The small wool sweater caught attention immediately. One afternoon, a young woman stopped and crouched beside her. "Did you make that?" she asked, pointing at the tiny sweater. The old woman nodded. The woman smiled and dropped several coins into the cup. "Make more," she said before walking away. The idea stayed in the old woman's mind long after the woman disappeared into the crowd. That evening she searched through rubbish bins near the clothing shops, looking for anything that could be turned into yarn. She found old sweaters, frayed scarves, and once even a bundle of loose wool someone had thrown away. She unraveled everything carefully. By the light of the street lamps she knitted small sweaters for the puppies, then began making slightly larger ones just in case they grew quickly. Some were crooked, some were too tight or too loose. But they were warm, and they were made with patience. Soon people began stopping not just to give coins but to look at the puppies wearing their tiny sweaters. Someone bought one, then another. The woman did not fully understand what was happening. She only knew that for the first time in a very long time, the coins in her cloth purse were slowly increasing instead of disappearing. But the change she noticed most was not the money. It was the nights. Where once she had curled alone in the cold, she now lay with two small puppies pressed against her side and the mother dog resting nearby, watching quietly over all of them. For the first time since losing everything, the darkness did not feel empty, because by the second week, the puppies had begun to change the way people saw her. At first it had only been curiosity. People slowed down because two tiny dogs in small hand-knitted sweaters were not something anyone expected to see beside a woman sitting on the pavement. The puppies themselves seemed unaware of the attention they were attracting. They waddled clumsily around her feet, bumping into one another, tugging at the loose threads of the sweater she had made for them, and sometimes curling up in her lap when the noise of the street grew too loud. The mother dog stayed close. She had grown calmer since that first night, though she still watched strangers carefully. When someone crouched too quickly or reached out without warning, the dog shifted her body just slightly in front of the puppies. It was not aggressive. It was simply protective. People seemed to understand that instinctively. They respected the small space the dog kept between her family and the world. The woman continued knitting every evening. She did it the way she had learned long ago, with patience and repetition. Her fingers moved slowly at first, stiff from the cold and years of disuse, but the motion returned to them day by day. She unraveled old sweaters she found in rubbish bins, separating the yarn carefully so it could be used again. Sometimes the yarn came in long, clean strands. Sometimes it broke every few inches and forced her to knot the pieces together. None of that mattered to her. Warmth mattered. Each sweater she finished became another small layer of protection for the puppies. Soon, she began making extra ones, not because she planned to sell them, but because the puppies kept growing faster than she expected. What fit them one week became too small the next. One afternoon, while she sat near the pavement as usual with the puppies playing around her shoes, a man stopped and watched her work for a long moment. "You made those?" he asked, pointing at the small sweater one of the puppies was wearing. She nodded quietly. The man picked up the puppy carefully, turning it slightly to examine the sweater. The puppy squirmed happily in his hands. "My daughter would love something like this for her dog," he said. The woman hesitated, unsure what he meant. He reached into his pocket and held out several bills. "Can I buy it?" For a moment she simply stared at the money. It was more than she normally collected in an entire day of sitting on the pavement. Slowly she nodded and handed him the sweater she had made that morning. The man placed the puppy gently back on the ground. "Make more," he said before walking away. She watched him disappear into the crowd. That evening, as she sat behind the old building where the dog slept beside her, she counted the money again and again. She had never planned to sell anything. The sweaters had only been meant to keep the puppies warm. But the next morning she returned to the pavement with 2 extra sweaters folded neatly beside her. People noticed immediately. Some stopped to admire the puppies. Some asked questions about the sweaters. A few bought them. The coins in her cup began to turn into bills. At first she used the money exactly the way she always had. Food came first. Bread, soup, small pieces of meat when she could afford it. The mother dog ate better now. The puppies grew stronger each day. But something else began happening that she barely noticed at first. The cloth purse inside her coat began to grow heavier. Instead of spending everything each day, she started saving small amounts without thinking much about it. A few coins here, a folded bill there. She told herself she might need it for food later, or medicine for the dogs if one of them became sick. The truth was simpler than that. For the first time in years, she had something to plan for. The puppies were now large enough to follow her when she moved around the street. They stayed close to her feet as if they understood that the pavement was not their home, but a temporary place where their small family survived together. People smiled when they saw them. Children often crouched beside the puppies, laughing when they stumbled over their own paws. Adults who once walked past the woman without noticing now slowed down to watch the little dogs in their colorful sweaters. Some left money. Some left food. One woman even brought a bag filled with old yarn. "I thought you could use this," she said. The old woman thanked her softly. That night she sat under the dim light of a street lamp, unraveling the yarn into clean strands. The puppies slept beside her, while the mother dog watched quietly from a few feet away. The woman's hands moved through the yarn steadily. Loop after loop. Knot after knot. She did not realize how much her life had already begun to change. She only knew that when she woke each morning now, there were 3 small lives waiting for her, 3 mouths to feed, 3 warm bodies pressed against her during the cold nights. The loneliness that once followed her everywhere had slowly begun to fade. She still slept outside. She still sat on the pavement with her metal cup. But something inside her had shifted. Without noticing it, she had begun working again. Not for herself. For them. By the time the cold nights began arriving earlier in the evening, the woman had grown used to the quiet rhythm of her new life. The days still began the same way they always had. She woke early, long before most people filled the streets, and carefully folded the blanket she used for sleeping. The puppies usually woke before she finished, stretching clumsily and pressing themselves against her legs in search of warmth. The mother dog would stand nearby watching everything with the same steady patience she had carried since the first night they met. Then the woman would gather the small pile of sweaters she had knitted and walk slowly toward the street where she usually sat. The puppies followed close behind her now. They were no longer the trembling little creatures she had first found behind the wooden crates. They had grown stronger and more confident, their legs steadier with every passing week. Their sweaters had grown more colorful too, made from the bundles of yarn people sometimes brought her when they noticed what she was doing. The woman still begged, but it no longer felt the same. People stopped more often now, not because she called to them, but because the sight of the two puppies wearing their hand-knitted sweaters seemed to pull attention in a way nothing else had before. Some people crouched down just to pet them. Others asked about the sweaters and sometimes bought one. She never raised the price. Whatever someone gave her, she accepted quietly. Most of the money still went to food. But slowly, quietly, the cloth purse hidden inside her coat began to hold more than it once had. At night, she sometimes counted the money under the dim light near the alley wall, not because she expected it to become something important, but because she had learned to protect every small thing she managed to gather. Still, when night came, nothing really changed. She and the dogs returned to the same corner behind the building where the wind could not reach them too strongly. The puppies curled against her legs, the mother dog rested nearby, and the city slowly emptied until only the distant sounds of cars and late footsteps moved through the dark. Most nights passed quietly. Until the night everything shifted. The wind had been colder than usual that evening, the kind of cold that made even the concrete seem to hold frost in its surface. The woman had wrapped her coat tightly around herself while the puppies slept beside her, their sweaters pulled close around their small bodies. She had just begun drifting into sleep when the sudden glare of headlights cut across the alley. For a moment she thought someone had taken a wrong turn. But the car slowed, then stopped. The puppies stirred beside her. The mother dog lifted her head immediately, alert but silent. The car door opened. A man stepped out, pausing near the entrance of the alley as if he wasn't entirely sure he had seen what he thought he had seen from the street. The headlights behind him cast long shadows across the wall, illuminating the small group huddled near the crates. The woman sat up slowly. The man approached carefully, not wanting to frighten the dogs. He looked at the puppies first, then at the sweaters they were wearing, then finally at the woman herself. For several seconds he said nothing at all. "You've been sleeping here?" he asked quietly. The woman nodded. The man glanced around the alley again, noticing the thin blanket, the bag of yarn beside her, and the small pile of finished sweaters folded near the wall. "And the dogs? They're mine now," she said softly. The man looked down at the puppies again. They had woken fully now, and were staring at him with the curious, fearless eyes only young animals seem to carry. For a long moment he simply stood there. Then he sighed. "Come on," he said gently. The woman blinked in confusion. The man gestured toward the car parked at the alley entrance. "You shouldn't be sleeping out here," he continued, "not with them." The woman hesitated. Years on the street had taught her not to trust sudden kindness easily. But something about the man's voice felt calm and certain, in a way she had not heard in a long time. Slowly she gathered her things. The puppies climbed into her arms as she stood, while the mother dog followed closely beside her. The man opened the back door of the car and stepped aside to let them climb inside. The car heater filled the space with warmth almost immediately. The woman held the puppies close as the car pulled away from the alley and began driving through streets that gradually grew quieter and darker. They drove for a long time. Soon the crowded buildings disappeared behind them, replaced by trees and open land where only scattered houses stood along the road. Finally, the car turned into a narrow gravel path, leading toward a small house sitting alone at the edge of a wide field. The man parked the car and turned off the engine. "This place has been empty for a while," he said, stepping out. The woman followed slowly, still holding the puppies. The house was small but solid, its windows dark but intact. The door creaked open when the man pushed it inward, revealing a quiet space that smelled faintly of dust and old wood. "It isn't much," the man said, "but it's better than that alley." The woman stood inside the doorway for a long moment. She had not stood inside a house in a very long time. The puppies wriggled slightly in her arms, curious about the new space. The mother dog walked cautiously across the floor, sniffing each corner before settling near the wall. The man watched them quietly. "You and the dogs can stay here," he said simply. The woman looked down at the cloth purse inside her coat. She had never planned for the money she had saved to mean anything beyond food and small needs. But now, standing in the doorway of the small house, she slowly removed the purse and held it toward him. "I can pay," she said softly. The man shook his head. But she did not lower her hand. She had learned one thing during the years she spent with nothing. Dignity mattered, even when you had almost nothing to offer. And she was not about to accept a home for free. The man did not take the purse immediately. For a few seconds he simply looked at the woman's outstretched hand, then at the small cloth bag she held so carefully. It was worn thin from years of being carried inside her coat, its edges frayed, the string that closed it tied into several knots where it had once broken. He could already guess what was inside. Coins. Maybe a few folded bills. Nothing close to what a house would cost. He gently pushed her hand back toward her. "You don't have to pay," he said. "Just stay here, take care of the place." But the woman did not move. She had learned many things during the years she lived on the street. Some lessons were painful, some were quiet, but one of them had stayed stronger than the rest. If you accepted everything for free, people eventually began to look at you like you were worth nothing. She slowly shook her head. "I saved this," she said softly. Her voice was calm, but there was something firm inside it. The man noticed it immediately. "This is not charity," she continued. "It is my money." The puppies shifted in her arms, curious about the quiet conversation happening above their heads. One of them let out a small, impatient sound and wriggled free, landing clumsily on the wooden floor. The second puppy followed seconds later, their small paws tapping against the boards as they explored the room. The mother dog watched them carefully. The man sighed. "All right," he said finally. He stepped closer and gently took the purse from her hand. "Let's see what you've got." He untied the string and opened the bag slowly. Coins spilled onto the small wooden table first. Dozens of them. Some old, some new, some worn so smooth they had lost their shine. Then came folded bills, creased from being opened and closed many times. He laid them flat on the table and began counting. The woman stood quietly beside him while the puppies wandered through the small room, sniffing every corner of their new surroundings. The mother dog eventually lay down near the doorway, her eyes still watching everything carefully. The man counted once. Then he counted again. When he finished, he leaned back slightly and looked at the money spread across the table. For a long moment, he did not say anything. The woman noticed the silence and lowered her eyes. "I know it is not much," she said quietly. The man shook his head slowly. "You've been saving this for a long time." She nodded. "From the sweaters," she said. He looked at the small pile of knitted sweaters still tucked inside her bag. Each one was slightly different, some crooked, some stretched unevenly where the yarn had been knotted together. But each of them had been made with the kind of patience only someone protecting something precious would carry. He looked back at the money. Then he looked at her. "This house," he said slowly, "is not worth much. It's small and it's been empty for a while." The woman said nothing. He pushed the pile of coins and bills gently back toward her. "But this," he continued, tapping the table lightly, "this is almost the same amount someone would have paid me for it." She looked up quickly. He smiled slightly. "You saved almost enough to buy the place." The woman stared at the money again, as if seeing it properly for the first time. The man pushed the purse back into her hands. "I'll take it," he said. Her head lifted again. "You will?" He nodded. "Yes." He gestured around the small room. "That way the house is yours." The woman closed the purse again slowly, still trying to understand what had just happened. The puppies had already decided the house belonged to them. One of them had climbed onto a small chair and was struggling to keep its balance. The other had discovered a loose thread on one of the sweaters and was chewing it happily. The mother dog had relaxed fully now, her head resting on the floor as she watched her puppies explore their new world. The woman walked slowly across the room and sat down near them. The wooden floor felt strange beneath her. Not cold concrete. Not pavement. A real floor. The puppies climbed immediately into her lap, their small bodies warm and restless. The mother dog moved closer too, settling beside her legs with a quiet sigh. The man watched them for a moment. "You know," he said, "most people would say you saved those dogs." The woman gently stroked one of the puppies' heads. "I thought I did." The man looked around the small house again. "But it looks like they saved you too." The woman smiled softly. For the first time in many years, night did not bring fear. Outside, the wind moved quietly across the open fields. Inside, the small house held warmth and quiet, and the soft sounds of 3 dogs settling into sleep. The woman leaned back against the wall, the puppies curled against her chest, the mother dog resting beside her. Her life had changed without her noticing. She had started by trying to save 3 small lives. And somewhere along the way, they had given her something she had lost long ago. A home,